Don't take your eyes off me. That you can't deny. Confident and gracious while stacking up paper on top of her game.
Hi guys, this is Angel Guibert with Beauty and Beast in Business and the Pro Firm. And today I am here with Yvonne Guibert, who is an entrepreneur. She is a consultant and she is an expert project manager for many big companies that she has worked with. She has over 30 years experience, which I am blessed and excited to talk to her. So welcome so much, Yvonne.
Thank you, Angel. So wonderful to be here with you.
Can you give us a little background, because you have so much experience and so much expertise. Can you give us a background, a little bit about what you've done over the years and where you are now?
So I'm going to have to summarize a great deal since, as you said, I've got 30 years experience, but I always like to start by saying, and you already said it, I've been in the industry over 30 years. I've struggled with saying that number out loud because I feel like it makes me, old, but I'm owning it and I am proud of the experience that I have. So I start with how I got into the workers' comp industry, and it was by accident. Like a lot of people arrive in this industry by accident. I had hurt myself. I was in between jobs. I had been working for one company and I was on the intramural softball team for that company, tore my ligaments out, had massive surgery. And unfortunately for me, I wasn't working for the company and didn't have insurance at that time. So I had to struggle, through that. But I got to be where I was desperate for a job. And so I just started, churning out the resumes, and I got an interview at this company. It was called ConserveCo. It was a subsidiary of the Travelers, and it was right here in Tampa. And I entered the company in the telemarketing department. So that was my entree into marketing. I really liked it. I liked the people, and learned a lot about the industry in a short amount of time. And then I quickly graduated into the marketing department. And they realized that I liked to read, that I could read and write, and that I had the ability to use logic. And so they quickly assigned the task to me to work on RFPs. So I would say that's how I really cut my teeth in the industry, is learning how to write and respond to RFPs. I learned a lot, and I would say it kind of went from there. So I learned a lot about the industry during the 90s. That was when managed care became, a real big thing. And so I saw how that blossomed and grew over the years from the time that it was introduced to the workers' comp industry. I also remember there being a lot of mergers and acquisitions during that time, something that's been happening again lately. I remember when the memo came out from CMS about Medicare set-asides and how that then became an industry. So, and the last thing I would say I can remember as a specific marker in my career is when opioids became an issue. I can remember when Actique, which was basically an opioid lollipop that was supposed to be given to end-stage cancer patients, that was starting to show up in workers' compensation, and so was Oxycontin. So I can remember all those things. And so I've had a long career, seen a lot of things, and I've been blessed to be able to work with several different companies with my experience.
And so throughout this time, you've really been based in marketing, correct? Now, coming from somebody like me, marketing can be very difficult because we are looking at sales. And so many times we take a look and say, oh God, we have to sell X amount. And it becomes a scary, scary thing for some people. What is a tip for those maybe women out there who have been thinking about getting into marketing and just really shy away from that, taking that risk?
So I would say, first and foremost, everybody thinks marketing is a sexy job. It's not. It's not for the faint-hearted. You have to have a lot of grit. You have to have a lot of perseverance, and you have to be a stickler for the details, because marketing is all about, first of all, depending on how you come into the process, there's usually a plan, a strategy. And so if you're coming in from a sort of a beginning stage in marketing, you have to understand, what your role is and how you fit into helping that marketing strategy get executed. And and then going on up the ladder with it, it's understanding that it's just a matter of understanding the vision of the company and putting into place the different processes, which this is where the hard work and grit comes in, because it's really difficult. We have a lot of things coming at us, and I've seen it get more difficult over the years. Back in the 90s, we didn't have the internet. It was just starting to be a thing. We didn't have any social media. So there were less interruptions, I guess you could say. And now we're having to get our marketing messages through all of that. So it's a real challenge. And I always tell people, you can't do it all. So you have to pick what things you're good at and what things the company can be good at in terms of executing, and then just really drilling down and executing the strategy and sticking to it, not deviating.
So many times we think we can do it all. We want to be able to offer everything, right? So really niching down is what you're talking about.
Yeah, understanding the company, understanding the nuances of that company. We are a very niche industry, very specific. But even within that industry, there are more specific, pathways, niches. So it's understanding what it is that your company does and what value it brings to the industry, and really learning how to, I'm a storyteller. So I always say, let's figure out what our story is, and then let's tell that story.
Is there a difference between marketing for another company and then marketing yourself?
Yes, I think that, it's got similar tenets. So just like you do with a company, you have to understand in yourself, what are your core values and strengths? Because if you're going to get really good at something, again, you have to learn how to tell the story. And so in order to tell your story and not have it be watered down or, pulled in different directions because of other labels that you might get assigned to you, which has definitely happened to me, you have to learn to understand and really own your values and your strengths and work towards those values and strengths in order for you to really shine.
Yeah, that's something that I think is sometimes difficult for us, because you can really advocate and sell something that you believe in, something that you think is great, whether it be a product or a service. And sometimes when it's ourselves, when we are our own business, and whether we are selling our services or we are trying to obtain a new job, a new career, we come into a play where we feel guilty sometimes or embarrassed to actually talk about the skill set that we have, the talents that we have, because we've been told so many times, don't brag. Don't brag about yourself. That's not how we talk about ourselves. And so that's why I wonder, what tip or tool do you have for a woman saying, I have this great skill set, but I have a fear of really bringing that to light when I sell myself?
Well, it's an interesting question. And I think that we're in a really interesting time right now. I'm very excited because I have two young daughters, 21 and 22. And I'm super excited for the opportunities that are in front of them, and all women, that are out there discovering themselves and how to bring their unique talents to the world. But you're right, and I'm older than you, so I was raised that you shouldn't brag, you shouldn't talk about yourself, you should be humble, So it's really difficult when you were raised with that mindset to learn how to talk about yourself in a way that doesn't feel like bragging. It's a really slippery slope, for us to learn that. So I would say, lucky for us that we're in a time where we're starting to realize that that's okay. It's okay to not only identify, but really lean into what your strengths and values are, because I truly believe, and I've learned over the past few years anyway, that's where you really start to grow. And that's what the world needs. The world needs strong people that are aligned with their strengths and values. And I think that that's just really exciting that we're growing into this time now that, we can step away from that concept that, oh, I shouldn't be talking or bragging about myself, because that's not cool.
Yeah, and I really think it's amazing, because honestly, I have seen some of your interviews. I have seen some of your, teachings online. through Work Comp Central and other avenues of companies that you've worked with. And I was really drawn to you because I thought, wow, she really knows what she's talking about. And you come across not only with your storytelling, but I think an inner shine that you have that attracts people to you. So I thought I had to reach out to you to talk to you. And you do cover a marketing area that so many of us don't talk about. And you also cover an advocacy area that I think very highly of, being an advocate myself for women and people of color. This is also, I think, a newer discussion or a newer topic, although it's always been there. I think that it's with social media being much more televised and much more open for people to discuss right now. Do you agree?
I agree, 100%.
And I think that sometimes insurance or, work comp, risk management, things like that, we know legalities. And so many times we have, as a whole, I will say we as a whole, as an industry, sometimes shied away from having these hard discussions because we do know those legalities. And I think that right now we're really having a more open discussion, and companies and people are taking a stronger stance on talking about their beliefs and talking about right from wrong and talking about advocacy. Are you seeing that across the board since you do work with so many companies?
I am. And as we've demonstrated, I've been in the industry for a long time. And I noticed, let me start with a short story. I grew up in South Texas, and I became really aware of this in the small town that I grew up in, Bandera. It's just northwest of San Antonio. So there's a good number of, Hispanic, Mexican heritage there. But I noticed right away as I became aware of things like this, I think it was around middle school, that there were no people of color. There were no Black people in our town. And one year, I think it was my 7th grade year, possibly, could have been my 8th grade year. I think it was 7th grade though. A Black family moved to town, and there was a brother and a sister. And I just remember being mortified because we were a small school. So we all had lunch in the same lunchroom, in like different shifts. But I would look over for what seemed like an eternity, but it was probably over several weeks, where this brother and sister would be sitting all by themselves at a table alone with not any other person at the table. And I just remember thinking, how sad, for them. So one day I picked up my lunch tray and I went and I sat next to them and I introduced myself and I started talking to them. And I remember getting the wrath of all of my friends and everybody. Like, you would not believe the ugly things, the horrible things that were said to me just for the fact that I picked up my lunch tray and went and talked to those people. Unfortunately, that family didn't last in that town. They were gone by Christmas. So that was a really deep impression on me as a child. And for whatever reason, that stuck with me. I've often had conversations with my husband. I don't understand what it was that compelled me to notice things like that and be aligned with things like that. But so back to your question, I've been keenly aware of that in our industry. Being that we're in the insurance industry, the larger part of the industry, it is predominantly white. And I see a lot of barriers and have seen a lot of barriers to people being able to grow in the industry. So it's been interesting, but again, we are in an interesting time, particularly this year. There's just so much going on. I mean, my gosh, pick any one thing. And as horrible as it is in that thing in and of itself, whether it's COVID or, the issues that are going on with Black Lives Matter, any number of issues, it seems like this is the year that many people are saying, you know what, enough is enough. We're going to not be quiet anymore. We're going to stand up and we're going to talk about these things. So from my perspective in our industry, even though I've noticed these things and I haven't been brave enough to speak up and talk about them myself, I'm starting to feel that empowerment because I see other people talking about it. There's a few individuals in our industry that I've seen just with so much grace and dignity stand up and speak their story. And I want to see more of that happening. And I think that, again, like I talked about with with women's issues. I think this is just an incredible time for people to take notice of what's happening around them, and that it's okay to feel strongly about things and to speak out about those things.
Yeah, I love to be able to go on and go online or talk to people and listen to their stories, because I think that so many times we see, or we have the ability, because we see other people, right? So we see other people talking up. And, this is something that I have kind of hit my head against ever since I can remember. Being a Latina from a very small town, and knowing that I always wanted to do something bigger and do something more. And it's great when you're in an area or a company that has so many people that look like you. But as you start to climb that ladder and you begin to move into different areas of business, where you may be the only person who looks like you. I know I've walked into a boardroom and I'm like, okay, I'm the only woman, or I'm the only person of color, or I'm the only, and how we hold ourselves and we stand our ground and we talk and we teach people who we are and what we do. It makes such a difference in the world. And recently I have been told that this discussion does not belong in business, and it does not belong in certain arenas, which to me really is false, because throughout business, we have to be able to talk about these hard issues, because companies need to be able to advocate and talk about where they stand. I know that if I'm putting an application with a company, I want to know how they feel about Black Lives Matter, or I want to know how they feel about women on boards of directors. And not only that, but are they walking the walk? When I look at their website, how many women are on their website that are not just middle management, but are in the C-suite and on boards of directors? So are you starting to see a lot of changes that way as well? Not just the check the box, but companies and CEOs who are really moving forward with diversity and inclusion?
I would say I'm starting to see, we've seen more conversations for sure around diversity and inclusion, I would say around the last decade or so. I don't know if I'm ready to say I've seen a lot of change. I think we're starting to see that change slowly happen. I agree with you. You mentioned your experience of noticing that, as you climb the ladder, you might be the only woman in the room, or you might be the only person of color. I'm hearing that a lot. And, I'm going to refer to people that I know, Margaret Spence and Marquez Torbert from Amitros. And I've heard them say that they can count on their hand that they're the only people of color that they know. So when they go to an industry conference, they're like, oh, there's Margaret. I need to go and talk to her. I don't know her, but I'm going to go talk to her because she's somebody like me. So I just find that it was an eye-opening experience to hear them say that out loud this year in conversations that surround what's going on as it relates to race and inequity in our industry. It's just, so to your question, I'm seeing the conversation start to happen. I don't think changes are happening fast enough. I think there's a lot of room to grow.
How is that affecting the marketing end of it? So do you, we talk about marketing, whether it's commercials, flyers, education, so many different things that marketing can cover. But are you starting to see these companies, and do you think we will continue to see these companies really think about how they market to people, who is being represented in their marketing, whether it is visual or whether it's written?
Well, I think that I'm going to go back to what I know. And I've done a lot of research and reading this year just to educate myself, to make sure that I understand. And, I'm just scratching the surface. I think, as much as I thought I knew, there's just so much more, to know. But what I've come to understand so far is that there are the studies show, it's a proven fact that the more diverse companies are, the more profitable they are. So I think that, in the best interest of continuing to be a strong leading company in the marketplace, it's only going to become more natural that they embrace that notion. And, let's face it, one of the things that is happening is people of color are becoming a bigger voice in our population. Those pieces of our population are starting to get bigger in numbers. So I don't see how it's going to continue to go without confronting those types of issues head on and embracing the fact that we're a diverse country. And the more we embrace diversity, I think the better off we'll all be for it.
So I'm also a chair for NABO, which is National Association of Women Business Owners. And we are actually the very first women organization that goes to the capitals that actually creates advocacy for women in business. And this last year, the number of women who have open businesses, and then women of color who have open businesses, has skyrocketed. It was like almost 200%.
Yeah.
And I think that the mindset is really like, well, if we can't find where we feel comfortable, we're going to create the business and the organization where we do feel comfortable, where we can excel, and then hire other people who have the same culture and the same beliefs and the same positivity to really go out there and do that. So it's kind of nice to see that and those numbers go up.
Yes, it is.
You are married to a person of color, correct?
I'm married to a Latin person. Yes, a Latino.
Okay. And let me ask, because I have friends, of course, across the board, every color. And, there's always that discussion of people don't understand. And so I really like talking to you because we are very honest and open, and we're just going to say what we're thinking. But as a white woman and then married to a Latino man, are there specific things that you've seen him have to go through that maybe you might not have seen had you not been married to him? So like, business-wise or just things like that.
Yeah, but I'm going to start with a story about my first husband. My first husband is from Iran. And so while he wasn't a practicing Muslim, so we were married and had two babies when 9/11 occurred. And I would say that was a very profound experience for me, being married to him during that time, because I witnessed this man, and he's a big guy, 6'4", strong, physically fit. He was a physical therapist at the time. He still is a physical therapist. And he worked at Tampa General Hospital. And I can remember this giant, strong man, my husband, coming home in tears because people that he had been treating for weeks in the hospital suddenly did not want him to be in their room and have his hands on their person because they now understood or believed that he was some evil, Muslim. That was it was heartbreaking. It was gut wrenching, and there was nothing I could do to help him. So I would say, we, as a white person, I can never understand what it's really like to a person of color or to a person that suffers the bias of the people around them, because I don't have that skin. I can only empathize with a person and see how deeply hurtful it is, to experience those things. But I would just say that, and then, my husband now, I've definitely seen, he's Latin, but he has really dark skin. So I've definitely seen some issues with that, even with people that are his friends, lifelong friends, saying, these things that we call microaggressions. Microaggressions are these little, hurtful, cutting comments that we say that we think that we're saying in fun, but they're really hurtful. And I see it happen a lot around, he's 68 years old and I still see it. And it's really, like I said, as a white person, I can never understand what that feels like, but I can look at it and empathize with it and know how deeply hurtful those things are. And I think, I don't remember if you asked me this question or not, but I'm going to say it. I think that that's what we can do. And what is needed is that white people can become allies and stand up against these microaggressions that occur on a daily basis everywhere around us.
So I applaud you for that because, it is a big deal, and you may not be able to personally understand it, but one, having the empathy, and two, having a better perspective of what's going on around you, and allows you to advocate for those other people. Because really what we talk about is, they're human rights, right? Mm-hmm. So that's what we see. And I have so many people who, I see it from both ends where they say, oh, well, they're white, so they don't understand. Well, no, the perspective is different. And I always say, you're never too late to come to dinner. So, right. If you have that perspective and you have that understanding, and I've seen people really change their perspective from one end to the other because they've seen the loved ones and the people around them be hurt from these things. And when we have those advocates, it opens those doors, right? So for me, my mentors, as I was first starting through the industry, were men. And I tell them it goes the same way because they had an understanding. They could see my skill set. They could see maybe things that were being said that I didn't hear, and had the compassion to teach me what they know and to sponsor me, to open doors that maybe, were not open. And it's the same thing, whether it's male to female or white to a person of color. There are so many things out there that you guys have the opportunity to assist and to advocate and to sponsor. And so it's a great thing, because when I see young people, they have told me before, we have not talked to people who look like us. And it's nice to be able to go back to the high school I graduated from, because I didn't see people who look like me, who were in business or had a career. And it was always somebody who kind of fit in that box that came back to look at us. And I'm glad to be able to do that. I tell them all the time, yes, I hope that you can look at me and say, I grew up on welfare. I came from a single parent home. My mom was a teenager. I mean, small, whatever it was. And now you can see where I am. So I want to be that advocate for them, but I also want them to remember that when you do that, you don't exclude. And so sometimes I do see that where we come into a specific area, and it's like I'm finding everybody who looks like me. And it kind of happens opposite then, because then we begin to exclude people who don't look like us. And being in business and having the opportunity to speak with you and so many other women in the industry and across business, I love making new friends. Everybody who looks every kind of way, because we have so many different experiences that we can share.
That's right. And like I've already said, I love storytelling, and everybody brings a unique story to the table. And I think it's just fascinating to hear the stories, understand the stories. And I love, what you said about yourself and your beginnings. And I grew up in a small town in Bandera, Texas. And a lot of things happened in my childhood that, I'll be talking about these things more. I talked about it a little bit last year with the Comp Laude People's Choice Awards. And it was more about a story that I had recalled, that I had taken a trip when I was 10 years old to see my father. My mom and dad divorced when I was really young. And it was a great trip, and there were a lot of great things that happened. And I had to go back to Texas, where I lived with an abusive stepfather. And the story was about, and it took me a couple years to get the story just right. I had submitted the idea a couple years before, and I thought, no, I'm not ready, because it was more about the abuse with my stepfather. And as I thought about it, and it was very difficult to write it out and talk about it, to begin with, because it brought up a lot of old scars. But as I wrote it out, I thought, you know what? This is not the story I want to tell. I don't want to tell the story about the abuse. I want to tell the story about how, as a child, I was able to get myself through it. And the way I got myself through it was by focus. It's what's called visioning now. It's a form of sort of conscious daydreaming, but it's a form of meditation that allows you to become resilient to the things that are happening around you. And I had no idea that that's what I was doing as a kid. But when I retell the story, I learned to focus on really positive experiences that I did experience. Thankfully, I was able to have that experience. There are a lot of people that never get that opportunity. There are a lot of people that are in abusive situations that never have the opportunity to see what it's like on the other side, right? So lucky for me, I was able to have that experience. And so that's how I ended up telling the story. I told the story about these, several little snippets of stories that I remember having with that one summer with my father. And, of course, I looked at him from that point on as my knight in shining armor, the thing that I wanted to end up doing when I got old enough to leave. And it was just the thing that pulled me through. And so that's what the story became focused on, was that versus all the dark, ugly stuff of the abuse.
So we are going to have to get back on and talk even more about this new subject, because I am also, I say, a champion for kids. I try my very best to put information out there to assist them. And right now, this is something that we're seeing during our time, is an increase in depression and suicide for children and teenagers, young adults.
Yes.
And it's sometimes the inability to focus on something bigger and possibility and so many, positive things like that. So you and I will be talking again soon, but going back into advocacy and vocalization, I know that you own your own business as a consultant, correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Do you think that there's a little difference in being able to openly talk about things that are important to you, as opposed to being an employee for another company? Because I've talked to some people, and they could feel very passionate about something, but are very quiet and haven't taken the stance yet because of a fear of either losing their employment or having the inability to find new careers or better opportunities. Because let's just be honest, for myself, people know me. If they've seen me or they've heard me talk, they know I am an advocate. And sometimes that's a little frightening, because you think, oh, well, there's going to be a lot of companies out there who don't want to hire you because they know where your stance is. How is that different as a consultant or as a person who owns their own business?
So I would say, you could argue the fact that because you own your own business, you do have a few more freedoms and whatnot. But I would say you're still in this industry. So you're still subjected to, one of the things that brought us together today was, I think you mentioned it earlier, there was a stream on social media where somebody was telling you that they didn't feel that your comments that were being made in the right forum. And I jumped on and basically, came to your side and said, look, if we're not going to talk about it here, where are we going to talk about it? So there is still a lot of that. And I'm going to go back to, while we're paving the way, I think that you have to be careful, because you still have this old way of thinking of, the workplace is not the place to talk about issues that we feel strongly about, or things like advocacy, or, championing one thing or the other. But I think, again, we're coming into a time where that is changing. At least I feel like it's changing. I've never seen so many people emboldened to speak up and to speak out about the issues that we're seeing, play out now. And I think part of that is due to COVID. Part of it is that, we've got a lot of energy pent up because we're not traveling. We're not seeing each other in the conferences anymore. So we have a lot of energy to get out of ourselves. And so that's one of the outlets, right? Where a lot of us are taking to online, some of us in more angry and destructive ways than others. But I would say, even though we're still in the same industry and there's a lot of that old thinking that's still pervasive, I think it's changing. And I feel, this is my feeling, that we all need to have a passion. And the sooner you become aligned with your passion, that's also aligned with your strengths and your values, the happier we'll be. And the more you become aligned with that, and the more you're able to, whatever it is that you choose to do, whether it's to advocate for an individual or for a specific segment, whether it's kids or women or whatever it is. We all need to be aligned with those kinds of things, because I think that's what gives us some part of our purpose in life, right? And the sooner we get aligned with those things, then the sooner we can get on with the business of servicing, for those individuals, being of service to those individuals. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. So my philosophy, and it's taken me a long time to get here, is as long as you're educated about whatever topic you're talking about, as long as you are respectful, and as long as, like I always say, why can't we just follow the rules of civil debate? I loved that class. I took that class in high school and I loved it. I remember my teacher saying, you should become an attorney, or, yeah, you're really good at it, you should become an attorney. I didn't follow that path, but I really miss the fact that we don't do that anymore. I mean, how often do we get to really sit face to face with a person that doesn't agree with us and have a real direct conversation about our opposing views with respect and with dignity, without it coming to ugly phrases and, possibly even to blows, with what you see happening in the world today. I think that that's something that we really need to figure out how to get back to, because that is what makes the world go round. Having the ability to argue but be civil about it is just something that I think more people should learn to embrace.
Things escalate very quickly and sometimes end up very aggressive. Yeah. And my mindset is I will always make my opinion or make my thought known. I am always willing to sit and have a discussion. And I think that so many times people speak to push home their ideas and their ideals. They don't stop to listen to the other person so that there is communication on both ends. And what happens is, I always tell people, please let me know the last time you swung somebody to your side, screaming, name calling,
yelling obscenities. Yeah.
Does it work? Because if it does work, how many times have people said, oh, you know what? You called me that name and now it makes sense. I get it. I'm coming to your side. It doesn't work that way. And the other thing that I do is, and it's something that I have had to learn, because I used to be very quiet and I did have the fear of speaking up. And I think that that's why with Beauty and Beast in Business, I really talk about navigating risk and having the ability to utilize that to cultivate life, not just in business, but in our personal lives, because speaking out is risky. Taking a stand is risky. Letting people know who you are is risky. Finding your passion, everything is risky. But how much risk are you willing to take to get there? And, I started to speak up and I started to really let people know who I am, and thinking that my thoughts, my feelings, my mission are just as important as everybody else's. And I will sit for a debate or a discussion. But if I converse with somebody and 2 times they come at me and they haven't changed their mind, but they haven't changed, it's not about changing their mind. They haven't given any information that is going to allow me to think about their side, and they have not thought about my side, I exit the conversation. And we have to be able to normalize that and make it okay to, 1, listen to somebody else, 2, have a discussion, and like you said, be knowledgeable about the topic just because we think something and we've heard it on the news and we see social media, it doesn't mean it's true. So you have to do your homework when you have these conversations, but also be okay with looking at somebody and saying, I understand, but at this point, I'm exiting the conversation.
Yeah, and another trick that my husband has taught me, because as you can imagine, it's hard to tell, but I have red hair underneath this gray. And so that means I lean towards the hot-headed side. And my husband has taught me this phrase that I've started to use, and it really works. And it is similar to what you're saying. It's a great way to exit a conversation that you want to remove yourself from. And it is simply to say, you might be right. But at this point, I don't want to be part of this conversation anymore. And then, whatever you want to exit it. But that whole "you might be right" phrase really diffuses and it startles people. They're not ready for it. And so it just kind of takes the air out of it, so to speak. And I wanted to say something too about what you said when you're talking about risk and having the courage to stand up and tell your story. I would say, and this is something that I'm going to start speaking about more in the coming weeks and months and years. What are you risking by not telling your story? Mm-hmm. So nobody knows about your story until you speak it, right? And the way you and I got connected is because in a way we were both speaking our story, right? And so that brought us together. So what are you risking by not speaking your story? If you don't put your story out there, then nobody knows what your story is and they are not able to connect to it. So I would say, ask yourself, what are you risking by not telling your story? And what awesome opportunities are you not opening up for yourself by not telling your story?
Yes, that is so important. And, I think that whether we are a male, a female, whether we are 16 or 66, those are discussions that we really should be having with ourselves, because at the end of the day, people will look at you. And for me, I used to be a people pleaser, and honestly, I still am. I want to make people happy. I want people to leave better than they were when they came. And that sometimes is a closed end of really showing people who you are, because when you do that, it's a fear of they're not going to like me. They're not going to want to work with me. They're not going to whatever. And on the opposite side, like you said, what are you risking? When we don't show people who we are and we don't tell our stories, we risk anxiety, we risk depression, we risk a lot of internal damage because we're not working through who we are or working through old issues that could possibly put us in a position where we, one, are going to help other people who might be dealing with the same thing.
Right.
Two, some amazing open doors that are going to take us to some great places on the other side.
That's right.
So before we end this, and I know that you have two daughters. I have two daughters as well. 23, she's going to be 23 and 14. And what is it that, whether you're talking to your daughter or a young person, that you might say to them about taking a risk and really being who they are? What is a tip for them if they're struggling with this?
So I'm actively involved in having conversations like this with my daughters frequently. And they're two very different personalities. So what I always say to them is just what I said before. Follow your passion. What are you passionate about? What do you feel strongly about? I firmly believe that if we don't do the work early on, because I didn't do that, I was told to squash it, to be quiet, to, you're not important, you don't matter, all those things. From the point of being very young, from I started with my stepfather. And so what happened to me was I was conditioned to believe those things, right? And so I just, as I grew into my career, whenever I would hear a message like that, it seemed normal. And so I just continued to follow along. So I didn't start doing any of the work for myself in terms of discovering my passions, probably until I started turning like around 40, honestly.
That's a big number. That's what I say. It was when I turned 40 that I put down stakes and I'm like, my whole world turned upside down.
Right. Well, my whole world turned upside down in a different way, but that'll be a conversation for another interview. But I would say, so that's what I tell my daughters is, do the work while you're young, while you have the freedom to explore and to discover and to try different things. I mean, it can't hurt anything. And, you're only going to get closer to your truth and who you really are, the more of those things that you do explore and discover. So I say, that's my number one tip. Do the work of discovering what your passions are and being honest with it. The flip side of that is be honest with yourself about what your, I don't want to call them shortcomings, but we'll just say the things that you are not as strong at, right? Mm-hmm. So that you've got your strengths and, some people would call the other things weaknesses, but just focusing in on the strengths and being honest about the things that you're not so strong at, because we all have strengths and weaknesses, but leaning into your strengths is where you're going to really shine. And the sooner you discover that, and the sooner that you're honest with yourself about what those things are, everything else will fall into place. Will start to fall into place.
Brilliant. Yvonne, that's an amazing way to end this interview. And I can't wait to talk to you again. Thank you so much for joining me here.
Thank you for having me. This has been fun.